Here's our part 15 now, central nervous system, the brain, and we're going to work on memory. And one of the things that I present to you in the idea of memory work, which is what you're involved in, you're getting a lot of new information all the time here in human anatomy and physiology. And so if you're going to study these things, first of all, you have to balance them and hold them within yourself. So I would always recommend try not to put too much in your mind at one time. 3 things usually are helpful. We can learn 3 things fairly well with a certain amount of facility and balance. So to see them, to touch them, it's even useful to write. One time I was in an early biology course in undergraduate school, and I asked the good Dr. Neff, who had his PhD out of Stanford, and I said, how'd you do it? And he sort of stared at me and said, what? I said, how'd you do it? Because I was I was letting him know that I was very impressed and honored that he was, presenting us information. And it took a long time before he realized what I was asking him is how did he learn the information that he was given? Here he is, a PhD in biology out of Stanford University. How do you do that? And so he finally admitted, as he went back through it in his mind, that he wrote things down a lot over and over. And so that's where this comes in, proprioception, movement, writing. Okay, there's also hearing things. So if you can even hear your own voice speak, if you're the one presenting information and you hear yourself speak, that's an aspect of it. Listening carefully in class, of course. Sometimes smell will impress upon you certain things. If you're a cook and you're learning how to cook certain things, there's a certain scent. There's also many other things that scent will, impress upon us. So especially if you're working in the garden with various plants, having a clear idea of whether the plant is prepared, ripe, or whatever, scent becomes an important detail. And then there's basically this initial storage area. And when you're studying, this is one of the things you're working with. I recommend that you abbreviate your buffering system. You don't put too much in storage. You work carefully, and you work from short-term to long-term memory. And there are these things that involve excitement. If you're enjoying what you're doing, you're already pretty much there. It may require rehearsal. Maybe it's not that enjoyable, and you just have to say it over and over again. You associate people who already have a degree will oftentimes have already built within themselves the notion of arrays and how to store information. Okay, so it's easier sometimes for someone to come in with a little bit of history of education behind them. Okay, so at any rate, all of this, there's this area of preparation here where you actually have to make your flashcards, you have to create your curve buster, question answer sheets or something like this, and then you have to go about learning everything. Okay, and the learning everything is the short to long term. And I would submit to you that you work in cycles of 18 to 20 minutes. There is a biochemical reaction in which you hold these things, and we actually do, in fact, retain and develop. It's one of those things where, of course, you're really going to grow. You're going to actually grow the synapses at night while you sleep. And to some extent, there's going to be growth factors present that will help you as you work. But I would say a good night's sleep, you'll wake up the next day. Many a time we attempt to learn how to do something, whether it's the most difficult aspects of guitar work or it's the most difficult aspects of a certain dance style, or in fact it's physical chemistry, and you're trying to learn quantum physics and how to apply Schrodinger's equation. It doesn't come right away, and sometimes weeks later suddenly you go through something that enough synapses are formed in which, of course, it makes sense. and suddenly you can play the guitar that way or dance that way, or you can calculate 3 unknowns and 3 equations. Uh, so the deal is that we do make progress. Okay, and here we're looking at 2 different types of memory. We're looking at something called declarative memory, and this is a conceptual, complex thought system, often involving symbolic aspects of memory. And it's usually using a slightly different aspect of the brain. The frontal brain is deeply employed, the executive suite here, and there's other aspects of the brain. Over here, we're doing something quite different. This is called procedural memory. That is to say, once you learn how to build a fence, will you remember how to do it again? Once you learn to bake a pie, do you remember all the steps that go into that, or how to play an instrument in a particular musical piece? And there's also the learning your way to get to a new location. Okay, sorry about the lack of clear writing here. But at any rate, the deal is that we have 2 different types of memory that have been identified by those that study these things, and the pathways are different. Let's take a look here at complex thought systems, conceptualization, and that type of work. It involves acetylcholine, and I'd like you to know that. I'd like you to know that it employs the hippocampus as a central area of memory work, and that the acetylcholine is being released by the basal forebrain, it says here. So right through here. Okay. So this is the idea here, is that we're using the executive suite. We have acetylcholine, and the hippocampus is getting sort of regular feedback until we go from short to long term. Okay. So we're actually building association cortex through this process. Okay, over on this one, we have a procedural memory. How does that work? Well, it turns out dopamine plays a role, and oftentimes people are pleasured by this activity, right? They really enjoy baking a pie. They really enjoy building an old Model T car and working on the paint job and stuff like that, or they really enjoy building something in their basement. There's a dopamine enjoyment to it. So we're dealing with basal nuclei here as a central theme. We're working back and forth with the thalamus. Dopamine from the substantia nigra of the midbrain is playing a huge role here. There is satisfaction. People tend not to do this type of activity involving procedure unless they really find some pleasure in it. And oftentimes studying is not key. I would submit to you that if you thought anatomy and physiology was fun and you absolutely loved looking up papers and you just felt so good about it and you got off on it so much that you would actually probably put yourself through adequate levels of studying to gain this type of memory from this type of procedure. Okay, so I'm just suggesting to you that there is something very pleasurable about procedural activities, skill activities, that there is something real at the end of it, shall we say, as opposed to something just purely as an idea. Okay, so take a look at those brain structures and make sure that you understand. We do have molecular bases of memory. It's partly because we're going to be changing the shape of a dendrite. We're going to be creating synapses. There is, in fact, a cellular level of memory, so that once you touch things, in fact, there is a change. There is something that I've been interested in, which is the way in which nipples in babies' mouths have a biofeedback system in which the mother actually is delivering slightly unique nutrient, how shall I say, adjustments in the milk based on what's going on in the oral cavity of the baby. And I'm very intrigued by the biofeedback mechanisms that work back and forth for such things. There's also, because I'm intrigued by body work, acupuncture, Toi Na, which is a physical therapy activity. I'm extremely interested in how the body responds to activities and practices, whether it's Tai Chi, Qigong, or massage therapy. So I offer you those thoughts as a way of taking another step. Okay? We'll move on to the spinal cord.